Chapter 4. Gossip. The impression that women talk too freely and too much in private situations is summed up in a word: gossip. Although gossip can be destructive, it isn't always. It can serve a crucial function in establishing intimacy, especially if it is not talking against but simply talking about. The label gossip casts a critical light on women's interest in talking about the details of people's lives, evidence that the negativity of the term reflects men's interpretations of women's ways of talking can be seen in the following excerpt from Marge Piercy's novel Fly Away Home. Daria falls in love with Tom partly because he differs from her former husband Ross in this respect. It surprised her what he knew about the people around him. Ross would never have known that Greta disliked her son's teacher, or that Faye has just given walking papers to her boyfriend because he drank too much in front of her boys. For a man, Tom had an uncommon interest in the details of people's lives. Gossip, Ross would call it, but she thought it was just being interested in people. Not only men disparage the interest in the details of people's lives as gossip. The great Southern writer Eudora Welty, remembering her Mississippi childhood, writes that her mother tried to keep a talkative seamstress from telling stories about local people in front of her little girl. "I don't want her exposed to gossip," Welty recalls her mother saying, as if gossip were the measles and I could catch it. But far from having a bad influence on the child, the gossipy stories about people that Welty loved to hear inspired her to become a writer. When people talk about the details of daily lives, it is gossip. When they write about them, it is literature, short stories, and novels. Mary Catherine Bateson draws another parallel between gossip and anthropology, the academic discipline that makes a career of documenting the details of people's lives. She recalls that her mother, Margaret Mead, told her she would never make an anthropologist because she wasn't interested enough in gossip. In gossip begins friendship. Telling details of others' lives is partly the result of women telling their friends details of their own lives. These details become gossip when the friend to whom they are told repeats them to someone else, presumably another friend. Telling what's happening in your life and the lives of those you talk to is a grown-up version of telling secrets, the essence of girls' and women's friendships. In Alice Mattison's story New Haven, which I quoted in Chapter 2, Eleanor tells Patsy that she is falling in love with a married man. As soon as these words are out, Eleanor feels a little ashamed to lack her secret suddenly, but she also feels pleased. She doesn't have to guard it for once, and it's exhilarating to talk about Peter. I was struck by Mattison's phrasing, "to lack her secret," which captures the way that having a secret makes a person feel enhanced, and telling it is giving something away, in the sense of possession as well as the idiomatic sense of revelation. Mattison also captures the pleasure in not having to hide something, and being able to talk about what's really on your mind. Not only is telling secrets evidence of friendship, it creates a friendship when the listener responds in the expected way. Eleanor does not know Patsy well, but she would like to. There is an affinity and a budding friendship between them. They have taken to going together for coffee and ice cream following the rehearsals of the musical group in which they both play. By telling Patsy what was going on in her life, telling her secret, Eleanor promoted Patsy from acquaintance to friend. Keeping friends up to date about the events in one's life is not only a privilege. For many women, it is an obligation. One woman explained that she didn't enjoy telling the story of her breakup with her boyfriend over and over, but she had to, because if she had failed to inform any of her close friends about such an important development, they would have been deeply hurt when they found out. They would have taken her secrecy as a sign that she was curtailing their friendship, clipping its wings. The woman, furthermore, was incredulous when she learned that her boyfriend had not told anyone at all about their breakup. He had gone to work, gone to his gym, and played squash with his friends, all if nothing had happened to change his life. Because telling secrets is an essential part of friendship for most women, they may find themselves in trouble when they have no secrets to tell. For example, a woman I will call Carol had several women friends she talked to every few days, exchanging stories about dates with men. They would share their excitement before a new date, and after the date took place, they would report in detail what had been said and done. So, when Carol fell in love and formed a lasting relationship with a man, she ran out of material for talks with her friends. She also had less time to talk on the phone since she now spent most of her free time with the man. This put a strain on her friendships. It was as if she had gathered up her marbles, reneging on her part in the partnership of talk that constituted the friendship. Situation in which one person feels abandoned because the other forms a permanent relationship are not limited to women friends. In the story Mendocino by Anne Packer, the narrator, Bliss, finds it sad to visit her brother, who now lives with a woman, because his intimacy with the woman has diminished his intimacy with her. Bliss recalls their former closeness, when they would exchange work stories and, into a second bottle of wine, confide in each other the news of their most recent failures at love. It amazes Bliss that until this moment she never once realized it was because they were failures that they talked about them. Now Gerald has his success, and it is as the two of them had never been anything but what they are now, very cordial. Because they are not exchanging secrets about relationships in one-on-one conversation, Bliss perceives her conversations with Gerald, now taking place in a group of three, to be wary and cordial, in a way more like public speaking. Many things conspire to separate people from the single friends if they find a stable relationship. I had a friend, a man who had been single for many years and had developed a wide and strong network of women friends to whom he talked frequently. When he developed a stable relationship with a woman and they moved in together, his friends complained that he did not tell them anything anymore. "It's not that I'm keeping things from them," he told me. "It's just that Naomi and I get along fine and there's nothing to tell." By saying this, he did, however, tell me about a problem in his relationships, although it involved not his partner but his friends. Rapport talk as lament. A folklorist, Anna Caravelli, studied women laments in the villages of Greece. Laments are spontaneous, ritualized, oral poems that some Greek women chant to express the grief over the loss of loved ones, to expatriation or death. According to Caravelli, women typically recite laments in the company of other women. Even more significant, they need other women to participate for the lament to be successful. One woman who performed lament for Caravelle to tape remarked that she could have done it better if she'd had other women there to help her. When the Greek women gather to share the laments, each one's expression of grief reminds the others of their own suffering, and they intensify each other's feelings. Indeed, both Caravelle and anthropologist Joel Coopers, who has studied a similar lament tradition in Bali, note that women judge each other's skill in this folk art by their ability to move others, to involve them in the experience of grieving. Expressing the pain they feel in losing loved ones bonds the women to each other, and their bonding is a salve against the wound of loss. According to anthropologist Joel Scherzer, the performance of tuneful weeping over dead loved ones is the exclusive domain of women in vastly different societies all over the world. Folk rituals of lament are parallel to the less formal but equally widespread ritual by which modern American and European women get together for troubles talk. They too bond in pain. This may explain why troubles make such good talk. Bonding through troubles is widespread among women and common between women and men. It seems to be far less common between men. Some of the men I interviewed said they did not discuss their problems with anyone. Most of those who said they did told me they tended to discuss them with women friends. Some men said that they had a man friend with whom they discussed problems, but there were differences that indicated they were somewhere farther on the continuum from the pole of intimacy than most women. First of all, they had one friend, at most two, with whom they discussed problems, not several or even many, as was the case with many women I talked to. Second, they often said they had not spoken to that friend in a while, days, weeks, months, or even longer, but they knew that if they needed him, he would be there. Most women were in constant touch with their closest friends and frequently discussed even minor decisions and developments in their lives. One man told me he does have a friend that he tells his troubles to, but if he does not have a serious problem, he does not call his friend. That's why so much time can pass without their talking. One woman, whom I will call Shirley, told me of her surprise at receiving a call from a man who had broken her heart. He said he wanted to come over and talk. It turned out that what he wanted to talk about was that he had just had his heart broken by another woman. Shirley asked why he had come to her. He said there was no one else he could talk to about how he felt. What about his friends? He just didn't feel comfortable talking to them about something like this. When most men talk to their friends on the phone, they may discuss what's happening in business, the stock market, the soccer match, or politics. They do gossip, although they may not call it that, in the sense of talking about themselves and other people, but they tend to talk about political rather than personal relationships, institutional power, advancement and decline, a proposal that may or may not get through the committee, a plan for making money. If men do mention their wives and families, the mention is likely to be brief, not belabored and elaborated in depth or detail. If they make reference to a difficult personal situation, it will likely be minimal and vague. It's been rough. A man described his Thanksgiving to me. 3 generations of his wife's family had gathered. brothers and sisters, their children, and their parents. The men went outside to play football, while the women stayed inside and talked. The older women ended up telling the youngest granddaughter she was too young to get married. Earlier, we saw that women's inclination to engage in trouble talk is confusing to men, who mistake the ritual lament for a request for advice. Now we can see that trouble talk is just one aspect of the ongoing intimate conversation that can be called gossip. Not only is providing solutions to minor problems beside the point, but it cuts short the conversation, which is the point. If one problem is solved, then another must be found to keep the intimate conversation going. Small talk serves a big purpose. Small talk is crucial to maintain a sense of camaraderie when there is nothing special to say. Women's friends and relatives keep the conversational mechanisms in working order by talking about small things as well as large. Knowing they will have such conversations later makes women feel they are not alone in life. If they do not have someone to tell their thoughts and impressions to, they do feel alone. This is dramatized in a short story by Ursula Le Guin titled In and Out. A woman who is becoming interested in doing ceramics gets some help and advice from a local potter. He gives her more attention than she thought, and she finds it difficult to get away. When she finally drives off, he calls after her saying that if she wanted to try bringing pots up on his wheels, she could come over any evening, which left her really wishing she was at the office, where she could tell somebody, he said, come over and bring pots up on my wheel. Like a writer who sees small events in her life as material for a story, Le Guin's character sees her life as material for conversation. Students in my class on gender differences recorded casual conversations between men friends and women friends. It was easy to get recordings of women friends talking, partly because most of the students were women, but also because the request to record a conversation with your friend met with easy compliance from the students' female friends and family members. But asking men to record conversations with their friends had mixed results. One woman's mother agreed readily, but her father insisted that he didn't have conversations with his friends. Don't you ever call Fred on the phone? She asked, naming a man she knew to be his good friend. Not often, he said, but if I do, it's because I've something to ask, and when I get the answer, I hang up. Another woman's husband delivered a tape to her with great satisfaction and pride. This is a good conversation, he announced, because it's not just him and me shooting the breeze, like, hi, how are you? I saw a good movie the other day, and stuff. It's a problem solving task. Each line is meaningful. When the woman listened to the tape, she heard her husband and his friend trying to solve a computer problem. Everything they said was technical and impersonal. Not only did she not consider it a good conversation, she didn't really regard it as a conversation at all. His idea of a good conversation was one with impersonal, factual, task-focused content. Hers was one with personal content. These differences also show up in relations between parents and children. My students tell me that when they talk to their parents on the phone, they spend most of the time talking to their mothers. Their fathers typically join the conversation only when they have a business matter to discuss or report. This happens in writing as well as in speaking. And apparently it is not limited to American families. A German student showed me a card she had received that her mother had covered with handwritten conversations inquiring about her daughter's life and health and filling her in on family news. Folded into the card was a brief typewritten note from her father, telling her to go to the university registrar and obtain a form that he needed for tax purposes. In response to an article I had written, a journalist remarked that my claim that many men have little use for small talk, since they believe that talk is designed to convey information, rang a bell with him. He deplores chit-chat and believes that talk should have significant content, be interesting and meaningful. This is fine so long as there is a business meeting with lots of substance to discuss, but he finds himself verbally hamstrung when the meeting breaks up and he has to embark on the long walk down the hall with a stranger, opposed in principle to and simply unpracticed in making small talk. He is at a loss when there is no big talk available. For most women, getting together and telling about their feelings and what is happening in their lives is at the heart of friendship. Having someone to tell your secrets to means you are not alone in the world. But telling secrets is not an endeavor without risks. Someone who knows your secrets has power over you. She can tell your secrets to others and create troubles for you. This is the source of the negative image of gossip. When gossip is rumor. The most negative image of gossip reflects a situation in which destructive rumors, which have no basis in fact, are spread. An extreme illustration of such a situation is Edna O'Brien's story, The Widow. In this story, a woman named Biddy, whose beloved husband has drowned, finally finds happiness in a new relationship. The people of the town watch her every move and criticize her new love interest, predicting disaster. But she has what she thinks as the last laugh when she becomes engaged. A week before the wedding, the happy couple visit the local pub and stand everyone to drinks. Then Biddy, being a little tipsy, tapped her glass with her engagement ring and said she was going to give a little recitation. Without further ado, she stood up, smiled that sort of urgent smile of hers, ran her tongue over her lips, another habit, and recited a poem entitled People Will Talk. It was a lunch at all those mischievous, prurient people who begrudged her her little flourish. It may have been, indeed, many people said that it was, this audacious provocation that wreaked the havoc of next weeks. Had she confided in a few local women, she might have been saved. But she did not confide. She stood aloof with her man, her eyes gleaming, her happiness assured. Far from assured, Biddy's happiness is doomed. She is undone by malicious and unfounded gossip. The rumor is spread that her first husband committed suicide because she made his life intolerable. Biddy tries desperately to prevent her fiancé from hearing the false rumors, and one of her efforts in this regard leads to her death. O'Brien implies that spreading the malicious rumor was the townspeople's way of punishing Biddy for thumbing her nose at the power of their tongues, and for holding herself aloof from them by not confiding in other women. In other words, they undid her with gossip because she had not shown the proper respect for it. In many ways, our society is becoming more private than public in orientation, more gossip-like in public domains. Most forms of public communication such as television news and public officials' press conferences, are becoming more informal in style, with remarks being made or made to seem off the cuff rather than prepared. One result of this is the need for frequent public apologies and even resignations by people who have spoken off the cuff, making the kinds of comments that are common in private conversations but unacceptable in public. Another aspect of this development is increased interest in the private lives of public people. It is perhaps not surprising that an aspect of this interest, perhaps a byproduct of it, is the role of rumor in public life. A Washington Post article headlined "The Public Politics of Rumor" notes that, whereas rumors have long been a staple of politics, only recently have they been readily reported by the media, whether or not the reporter has been able to confirm their truth. The incident that sparked this article was one in which the Republican National Committee's communication director resigned after having written and distributing a memo implying, not stating, that the newly installed Democratic Speaker of the House was homosexual. The Post writer comments that rumors are effective even if they are later disproved and retracted. The damage is done by their mere existence, because most people assume where there is smoke, there is fire. The American public arena has become a little more like the Irish community of Edna O'Brien's story. The uses of gossip. These are dramatic examples of the destructive potential of gossip. Nora Ephron describes the more circumscribed danger of telling one's secrets to friends in her novel Heartburn. The heroine, Rachel, runs into her friend Meg Roberts on a plane to Washington from New York. Meg mentions their friend Betty's birthday party, and Rachel is aghast to realize she forgot all about the party. She has an unassailable excuse. She left her husband and flew to New York because she had learned that he was passionately in love and having an affair with another woman. Now, however, she is on her way back home with her husband, intending to resume her marriage. She doesn't want to make use of her excellent excuse because it would be too good as gossip. The only way Betty would ever forgive me would be for me to tell her why. And if I told her why, she'd tell everyone in Washington. And then everyone in town would know something about our marriage that I didn't want them to know. I know all about Meg Roberts' marriage, for example, because Meg confides in her friend Anne, who confides in Betty, who confides in me. True friends, everyone feels, do not repeat their friends' secrets to others. Revealing a secret can be the basis for the end of a friendship. And yet people do often repeat what is told to them in confidence by their friends. Why is this so? Penelope Eckert, an anthropologist, spent time with high school girls and got to know their social worlds. Donna Ida, a sociologist, did the same in junior high school. Both noticed that girls get status by being friends with high-status girls, the cheerleaders, the pretty ones, the ones who are popular with boys. If being friends with those of high status is a way to get status for yourself, how are you to prove to others that a popular girl is your friend? One way is to show that you know her secrets, because it is in the context of friendship that secrets are revealed. A few high school girls told Eckert that they prefer to have boys as friends, because boys don't try to get juicy details. and are less likely to spread them around. The girls may think that this demonstrates the moral superiority of boys, but Eckert points out that the reason a boy is less likely to scavenge for gossip and distribute his findings is that he has much less to gain by it. Boys' main access to status is less a matter of whom they are close to than of their achievements and skills, primarily at sports, and their ability to prevail in a fight, though the older a boy gets, the more his fights tend to be verbal rather than physical. There is yet another way that the desire to forge connections may be at work in creating gossip. Talking about someone who is not there is a way of establishing rapport with someone who is there. By agreeing about their evaluation of someone else, people reinforce their shared values and worldviews. Gossip as social control. The reinforcement of values by talking about other people also works in another way. We measure our behavior against the potential for gossip, hearing in our minds how others are likely to talk about us. In trying to decide what to do, we automatically project contemplated actions onto the backdrop of this imagined dialogue, and our decisions about how to act are influenced by what we think others would say about them. Having decided, we hide, adjust, or display our behavior to prevent criticism and ensure being praised. Those who are of a rebellious nature and age may defy expectations evidenced in gossip. Regardless of the stance taken toward them, the assumptions underlying what people will say plant in us an image of what a good person is and does. Hearing people praised for being generous and self-effacing, we get the idea that these are good things to be. Hearing people criticized for being stingy, disloyal, or ugly, we get the idea that these are not good things to be. Women and girls feel that it is crucial that they be liked by their peers, a form of involvement that focuses on symmetrical connections. Boys and men feel it is crucial that they be respected by their peers, a form of involvement that focuses on asymmetrical status. Being disliked is a more devastating punishment for women and girls because of their need for affiliation. Marjorie Harness Goodwin, in her study of teen and preteen boys and girls at play, found that when a girl's behavior was strongly disapproved, the other girls ostracized her for a month and a half, the ultimate means of social control. In contrast, although boys sometimes left the group when they felt they were insulted too much, Goodwin did not find boys excluded for an extended period of time. Letting it show. The need to be liked and approved of can be at odds with the need to reveal secrets, since secrets expose one's weaknesses. In an example I gave earlier, a woman's former boyfriend had his heart broken and he wanted to talk about it, so much that he went to her, even though he had left her long before. Why didn't he feel comfortable talking to his friends about problems? Maybe for the same reason that many men interviewed by Catherine Kohler-Reisman did not talk to anyone about their divorce. One of the men told her, "I think everybody hates to have anybody know that they have problems. You always try and keep your problems to yourself." Maybe for the same reason that many men interviewed by Catherine, these men, like many others, are keenly aware of the imbalance in power that can result from telling secrets. For one thing, Those who show weakness can feel they have put themselves in a one-down position. For another, they are giving away information that could be used against them. Women are aware of this danger too. Robinette Kennedy, a psychologist who studied women's friendships in a village in Crete, found that women are keenly aware of the danger of malicious gossip resulting from exchanging secrets. She asked 12 schoolgirls to write what qualities they valued in a friend, and every single one wrote, "Not betraying secrets." Kennedy found that some women actually avoided having friendships for this reason, but they missed having friends. In a society where men and women lived in separate spheres and had to take clearly defined roles in relation to each other, having a woman friend meant that there was at least one relationship in which a woman can be completely herself and be understood and accepted. If she had no one to whom she could tell her true feelings, she felt painfully isolated. The women and girls in the Greek village and the American schoolgirls that Ida and Eckert studied had the same dilemma. They needed friends to talk to, but they knew that talking to friends is risky. Girls and women, more often than boys and men, are willing to take the risk because their eyes are on the payoff in rapport. The possibilities of appearing vulnerable and of losing independence are in the corner of the eye. Men are less likely to take the risk because for them preventing vulnerability and protecting their independence are in the foreground and issues of intimacy in the background. Many men resent their wives or girlfriends talking about their relationships to friends. For these men, talking about a personal relationship to others is an act of disloyalty. One man I interviewed waxed eloquent on this point. He said he regarded telling intimate details about a relationship, especially those that showed a partner's weaknesses, as a breach of trust, pure and simple. He expressed disdain for anyone who need to stoop to such a level in order to create rapport with friends. Such strong reactions support the claim by anthropologist Jill Jubish, writing about the Greek culture, that talking about family matters to non-family members is taboo because it destroys a sacred boundary between inside and outside, taking outside the home what properly belongs inside it. Jubish also points out the symbolic connection between verbal and sexual pollution. Allowing strangers into the house by telling them the family secrets is like illicit sexual penetration. This seems to capture the dilemma of widows in Greece as seen in a line from a lament that Caravelli recorded. Widow in the house, gossips at the door. The widow is confined to the house because if she steps outside, anything she does will expose her to the sexual accusations of gossip. To say that many men do not exchange secrets about their own and other lives for the purpose of establishing intimacy is certainly not to say that they do not have a need and a way to bond with others through talk. If women's source of involvement, talking about personal lives, is an irritant to men, then to find a source of men's involvement, we can inspect an aspect of their behavior that is an irritant to women. The daily newspaper. News as gossip. A retired professor met daily with several retired male friends at a local diner. He and his friends referred to their gatherings as solving the world's problems, and this gives a good indication of what they talked about. Men's interest in the details of politics, news, and sports is parallel to women's interest in the details of personal lives. If women are afraid of being left out by not knowing what is going on with this person or that, men are afraid of being left out by not knowing what is going on in the world. And exchanging details about public news rather than private news has the advantage that it does not make men personally vulnerable. The information they are bartering has nothing to do with them. In a book about the history of news, Mitchell Stevens points out that men have long been obsessed with exchanging details about current events. He does not actually say he is talking about men, but rather the English. However, it is clear from his description that it is Englishmen to whom his comments apply. It might be surprising to learn that more than 200 years ago, the English, though they had no radio, televisions, satellites, or computers, they obtained much of their news at the coffee house, thought their era was characterized by an obsession with news. The condition was described in a newspaper written in 1712 as the furious itch of novelty, and it was said to have proved fatal to many families. The meanest of shopkeepers and handicrafts spending whole days in coffee houses to hear news and talk politics, whilst their wives and children wanted bread at home. Similar behavior had been noted in the mid-17th century in Cambridge. Scholars are so greedy after news that they neglect all for it. One concerned observer complained, "If the English are gathering in coffee houses to talk politics, while their wives and children are at home, then the English are actually Englishmen." But how similar is this picture of men gathering to exchange news is to the stereotype of women neglecting their household duties to gossip on the phones or meet over coffee in their kitchens. The power of details. Discussing details about the news and exchanging details about private lives are coming together as newspapers report more about the private lives of people in the news. The phenomenal success of People magazine is only the most extreme instance. Consider this article opening. Charles and Jeanne Atchison live near the Cowboy City Dance Bar on a gravel street in a peeling gold and white mobile home. Weeds sway in the breeze out front. It's a street with a melancholy down on one's luck feel about it. The town is Azle, Texas, a tiny speck on the periphery of Fort Worth. A few years ago, the picture was a far prettier one. Charles "Chuck" Atchison was all set. He made good money, more than $1,000 a week, enough to pay for a cozy house, new cars, fanciful trips. But all that is gone. He's 6 months behind on rent for his land, and don't even ask about the legal bills. It's sort of like I was barreling along and I suddenly shifted into reverse, Mr. Atchison said with a rueful smile. Well, welcome to whistleblower country. Chuck Atchison is 44, with a stony face and a sparse mustache. These lines are not from a short story or a magazine article. The excerpt is from the front page of the business section of the New York Times, that soberest section of soberest of American newspapers. In reporting what happened to Atchison, a quality control inspector who exposed safety violations at a nuclear plant, the journalist gives a personal view of the whistleblower, what he looked like, what his house looked like, details that involve the reader. According to columnist Bob Greene, journalists began turning their attention to such mundane details in 1963, when Jimmy Breslin wrote a column entitled "A Death in Emergency Room", one describing the last moments of John Kennedy's life. Greene says Breslin's column literally took his readers to the corridors and operating rooms of the Parkland Hospital on that day. Greene observes, journalists today are trained to get those telling details quickly. The same brand of journalism is said to have established the career of columnist Russell Baker, whose coverage of Queen Elizabeth's coronation focused not only the public pageantry but on the backstage details. For example, as a reviewer noted, the long lines of colonial potentates in animal skins and gold braid forming to use Westminster Abbey's toilets. Why would readers want to feel that they were in the corridors and operating rooms of the hospital in which Kennedy lay? Why would they be interested in the lines outside the toilets at a coronation? Because such details give them a pleasurable sense of involvement, of being part of something, just as gossip does for women who talk about the details of their own and others' lives. The joy of involvement. Despite the growing appreciation of details in news stories, the usefulness of telling details in everyday conversations is not universally recognized. One woman told me that members of her family refer to her grandmother in a phrase that typifies the old woman's conversation. "I had a little ham. I had a little cheese." This affectionate yet disparaging mode of reference reveals that they find it boring when grandmother tells them what she had for lunch. They wish she would give fewer details, or not report her lunch at all. My great-aunt, for many years a widow, had a love affair when she was in her 70s. Balding, obese, her hands and legs misshapen by arthritis, she did not fit the stereotype of a woman romantically loved. But she was, by a man also in his 70s, who lived in a nursing home, but occasionally spent weekends with her in her apartment. In trying to tell me what this relationship meant to her, my great-aunt told me of a conversation. One evening she had had dinner out with friends. When she returned home, her male friend called and she told him about the dinner. He listened with interest and asked her, "What did you wear?" When she told me this, she began to cry. "Do you know how many years it's been since anyone asked me what I wore?" When my great-aunt said this, she was saying that it had been years that anyone had cared deeply, intimately about her. The exchange of relatively insignificant details about the daily life sends a meta-message of rapport and caring. Attention to details associated with a person is often a sign of romantic interest. In a novel titled "The Jealous One" by Celia Fremlin, a woman sends her husband, Geoffrey, next door to deliver a dinner invitation to their new neighbor who has moved in that day. Geoffrey returns full of excitement, bubbling with admiration for and details about the new neighbor. He announces, starry-eyed, that the neighbor has invited them to dinner in her not yet furnished home, and he asks his wife if she has a red ribbon for Shanglo, the neighbor Pekingese, explaining that Shanglo is the opposite of Shanghai. The wife responds with irony, but Geoffrey is slow to join in her ironic denigration of the neighbor's ears in neighboring her dog. She giggled in terrible solitude for a fraction of a second, and then Geoffrey joined in, a tiny bit too late and a tiny bit too loud, and the joke did not lead to another joke. Murmuring something about having promised, Geoffrey hurried away out of the kitchen and out of the house without any red ribbon, and this piece of red ribbon, which they didn't look for, didn't find, and probably hadn't got, became very first of the objects which couldn't ever again be mentioned between them. Geoffrey's romantic interest in the new neighbor leaks out in his enthusiastic, uncritical recounting of details about her, such as the breed and name of her dog. If recalling a detail or name is a sign of caring, failure to recall a name can be seen as a sign of lack of caring. Complaints are frequent from people whose parents disapprove of their partners or friends and seem to display their disapproval subtly by habitually referring to them by the wrong names or failing to recall their names. The same phenomenon can be manipulated for positive ends. This was the case with a woman who remained friends with the wife of an acquaintance of her former husband's. Her friend persisted in referring to the former husband's new wife as "What's her name?" The divorced woman took the meta-message of this to be, "Though I see her occasionally, I don't really care about her. You are still the one who counts to me." Not remembering the new wife's name was offered as evidence of lack of caring for her, and consequently loyalty to the first wife. Paying attention to the details of a person's appearance can be a means of flirting. A woman had an appointment to meet a man she had met only once before, briefly. They were both married. The purpose of the meeting was business. But the man began their conversation by observing that she looked younger than he recalled, and her hair was different. "You were wearing a hat then, weren't you?" he said, "and you were dressed in white then too." Simply noting that he had noticed her appearance the first time they had met was a kind of flirtation. It was not a displeasing one to her, though her husband found it displeasing when she recounted it to him. The noticing of details shows caring and creates involvement. Men, however, find women's involvement in details irritating. Because women are concerned first and foremost with establishing intimacy, they value the telling of details. Conversely, many women complain that men do not tell enough details. A woman thus frustrated is Laura in Alice Mattison's story Sleeping Giant. Laura and Dan are both troubled by their son-in-law's plan to buy an old, run-down house. In the past, when Laura tried to talk to her daughter about it, the daughter defended her husband. But Dan now assures Laura that their daughter sees her point of view, because she said as much to him. "Believe me," he said, "she's not happy about this." Laura wants more details about the conversation, but Dan won't supply them. Laura asks, "Well, why doesn't she tell him so?" He doesn't answer. "What did she say exactly?" Laura is searching in her canvas bag for her car keys. She's chilly after all, and there is a flannel shirt in the trunk of the car. She waits, holding the keys and the bag, but Dan still doesn't answer, and she drops the bag on the bench. "What did she say?" "Oh, I don't remember. Journal things." "What did you say?" "Oh, I don't know, Laura." Laura turns aside abruptly, opens the trunk, and stares into it for a moment, annoyed that Dan won't tell her more. Laura seems like innumerable flesh and blood women I've talked to. As one put it, men do not tell the whole story. Who said what? Another complained of her husband. It's like pulling teeth to get him to tell me, what did she say? What did he say? Yet another woman recalled a time that her best friend's husband tried unsuccessfully to take part in one of their conversations. Breaking with tradition, he tried to tell about an experience that he thought was similar to the ones they were discussing. The two women plied him with questions he couldn't answer about exactly what had been said and how and why. He backed off from the story and didn't try to tell any more. Perhaps he was wondering to himself why the women were so interested in all these unimportant details. Skip the details. Though many women value the recalling of subtle nuances in conversations with close friends, there are situations in which everyone feels oppressed by being told or asked for what seem like too many details. If interest in details is a sign of intimacy, a woman will resist such interest if it comes from someone whom she doesn't want to be intimate with. And everyone has had the experience of being told unwanted details, so many that they seem pointless, or demand longer or more intimate attention than one wants to give. Many of the examples I have collected of people piling on details in conversation involve old people. This may be because old people often want more involvement with young people than young people want with them, or because old people frequently cannot hear well. So they tell detailed stories to maintain interaction. Old people are also more inclined to reminisce about the past, consequently telling stories that are likely to include details. It is a tenet of contemporary American psychology that mental health requires psychological separation from one's parents. One way of resisting over-involvement, for some people at least, is resisting telling details. For example, one woman told me that her mother sought over-involvement with her and had succeeded in achieving over-involvement with her sister Jane. To support her claim, she said, "It's amazing the details of Jane's life my mother knows." Later, she was explaining how she resists her mother's attempts to get overly involved in her life. As an example of her mother's prying, she said, "She's hungry for details. If I tell her I went somewhere, she asks, 'What did you wear?'" The question that offended this woman was the same one that had brought my great aunt such happiness. The difference is that my great aunt was seeking involvement with the man who asked her what she wore. This woman was resisting what she perceived as the excessive involvement her mother sought with her. Presumably, however, her sister Jane talks to their mother. She does not feel that the question, "What did you wear?" is inappropriate. Perhaps, like my great aunt, Jane values the show of caring and resulting involvement. Mixing business with gossip. Many women mix talk about relatively important things like business with talk about relatively unimportant things like clothes. On Monday morning, Marjorie walks into Beatrice's office to ask her opinion about a contract. After they had settled their business, or perhaps before, they bring each other up to date on their personal lives. Marjorie has her hands full with her ailing mother-in-law. Beatrice is feeling optimistic about a new relationship. A woman who runs a counseling center noted that when she meets women on her staff, It is not unusual for them to spend 75% of their time in personal talk and then efficiently take care of business in the remaining 25%. To men on the staff, it seems like wasting time, but the director places a value on creating a warm, intimate working environment. She feels that such personal talk contributes to a sense of rapport that makes the women on her staff happy in their jobs and lays a foundation for the working relationship that enables them to conduct business so efficiently. The mutual knowledge and trust that grows out of personal talk can precede a business relationship as well as grow out of it. A magazine article described a partnership between two women who own a construction company. The seed of their working relationship had been planted years before the business was founded, when the two women met regularly to exchange coffee and talk. When one of them decided to start a business, her working relationship with her partner was already in place. For women who engage in frequent, regular social talk with friends, the machinery is up and running when a significant decision needs to be made. Elizabeth Loftus, a psychologist specializing in eyewitness testimony, was confronted with a moral dilemma when she was asked to testify on behalf of the man accused of being Ivan the Terrible, a notoriously sadistic Nazi war criminal. To be consistent, Loftus felt she should testify in this case, as she had in many others. But her relatives and friends argued against it, and she recoiled at the prospect of undermining the testimony of the few witnesses who were alive to tell what Ivan had done. A mere 50 survivors of an estimated million of Ivan's victims. The dilemma was resolved when a friend dropped by for tea. Loftus recalls, "My friend, quoting Emerson, reminded me that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." With this comfort, Loftus decided not to testify. If men and women have different habits for social talk, they also make different use of it. Differences in uses of social talk also begin early. One couple I talked to had different perspectives on their son's relationship with his best friend. The mother thought it odd that despite the significant amount of time the boys spent together, for example playing football, their son found out what college his best friend was going to by reading it in their yearbook. One day a girl called him to ask whether his friend had a date for the prom. She was calling for her friend, who wanted to ask his friend, but not if he already had a date. Not only did their son not know whether his best friend had a date for the prom, but he was annoyed that the girl thought he should know. He gave her his friend's phone number and suggested she call to find out directly. He later commented that had he known his friend was going to the prom, he might have planned to go himself. Not keeping up with such personal information deprived him of a chance to go. All of this seemed very strange to the boy's mother, who could not imagine what it meant to be best friends if it didn't include knowing the basic developments in the other's life. To the boy's father, however, it seemed unremarkable. Talking about versus talking against. The relatively positive or negative value that is placed on talking about personal details of one's own life or others is reflected in the positive and negative views of gossip. One man commented that he and I seemed to have different definitions of gossip. He said, "To you, it seems to be discussion of personal details about people known to the conversationalists. To me, It is a discussion of the weaknesses, character flaws, and failures of third persons so that participants in the conversation can feel superior to them. This seems unworthy, hence, gossip is bad. This man's view parallels that of a woman who told me she was troubled by one of the women in her childcare co-op who gossiped too much. But it turned out that this woman's gossip was all negative, putting down other members of the co-op and criticizing them. It was not the talking about that was disturbing, but the talking against. This distances the speakers from those they are talking about, rather than bringing them closer. Furthermore, it is natural to assume that someone who has only negative things to say about others will also say negative things about you when you aren't there. Gossip, as talking against, is related to a verbal game that Christine Chepin calls scapegoat. In conversations she analyzed, Chepin found that speakers talked against someone who wasn't there to redress imbalances of power that had erupted. Scapegoat was a way for speakers to achieve parity with each other by teaming up with someone else. In Chepin's examples, however, the third party whom the conversationalists teamed up against wasn't just anyone, it was their boss. And this brings us back to the view of the man who told me why he considers gossip to be bad. To the extent that talking about someone who is not there brings an absent party into the room, the effect is to establish connection. But if that party is brought into the room to be put down, then the effect is negotiation of status. As always, connection and status are operating at once, so both views are valid. They are different takes on the same scene. Women and men on their own terms. What is the solution, then, if men and women are talking at cross purposes about gossip as about other matters? How are we to open lines of communication? The answer is for both men and women to take each other on their own terms, rather than applying the standards of one group to the behavior of the other. This is not a natural thing to do, because we tend to look for a single right way of doing things. Understandably, experts are as liable to do this as anyone else. A national audience participation talk show featured a psychologist answering questions about couples' relationships. A woman in the audience voiced a complaint. My husband talks to his mother, but he won't talk to me. If I want to know how his day was, I listen to his conversation with his mother. The psychologist told this woman he probably trusts his mother more than he trusts you. This comment reinforced the woman's own suspicions and worst fears, and what the psychologist said was perfectly legitimate and reasonable within the framework of talk in women's friendships. The friend to whom you talk daily, telling all the little experiences you had, is your best friend. But how reasonable an interpretation is it from the man's point of view? I would wager that her husband did not think he needed to do anything special to create intimacy with his wife, because he was with her every day. But because his mother was alone, he humored her by telling her unimportant little things that she seemed to want to hear. His mother's need to hear such details would make sense to her son because she was alone and needed them as a substitute for the real thing, like watching life from her window. He wouldn't understand why his wife would want and need to hear such talk. Although it is possible that this man trusts his mother more than his wife, the evidence given does not warrant such a conclusion. This therapist was judging the man's way of talking by women's standards. In a sense, the values of therapy are those more typically associated with women's ways of talking than with men's. This may be why a study showed that among inexperienced therapists, women do better than men. But over time, with experience, this gender difference disappears. Eventually, perhaps men therapists and men in therapy learn to talk like women. This is all to the good. Assertiveness training, on the other hand, teaches women to talk more like men. And this too is to the good. Men and women would both do well to learn strategies more typically used by members of the other group, not to switch over entirely, but to have more strategies at their disposal. Habitual ways of talking are hard to change. Learning to respect others' ways of talking may be a bit easier. Men should accept that many women regard exchanging details about personal lives as a basic ingredient of intimacy, and women should accept that many men do not share this view. Mutual acceptance will at least prevent the pain of being told you are doing something wrong when you are only doing things your way.